Have you ever felt like you were trying so hard to be happy, yet somehow the joy kept slipping through your fingers? I used to believe happiness was something you find out there, waiting for you at the end of a goal, a paycheck, or a perfect day. But life had a different lesson to teach me. It taught me that happiness isn't discovered, it's woven. Thread by thread, moment by moment. There was a time not too long ago when my life felt like a tangled mess. I was 34, working as a graphic designer in Chicago. Deadlines, notifications, constant noise. I kept telling myself, once this project is done, once I get that promotion, then I'll finally feel at peace. But that then never came. One Friday night, after another 12-hour day, I found myself sitting in my tiny apartment, surrounded by screens, half-empty coffee cups, and a silence that felt heavier than exhaustion. I remember whispering to myself, "Is this it?" That question echoed inside me for days, until one Sunday, I wandered into a local art fair near the river. That's where I met her, an old woman named Margaret, sitting behind a table covered in hand-woven tapestries. The colors caught my eye: golds, deep blues, soft greens, all woven into patterns that seemed alive. I asked her, "How long does it take to make something like this?" She smiled gently and said, "A lifetime." I laughed, thinking she was joking. But she looked at me and added, "Every thread tells a story. Every mistake becomes part of the pattern." Something in her tone made me stop. I ended up sitting with her for almost an hour, just listening. She told me how she had lost her husband years ago, how grief tore her apart, but instead of trying to escape her pain, she started weaving again. Each morning, she said, I'd choose my threads, some bright, some dark, some rough, but I'd weave them all together. Because that's what life is. That night, when I got home, I couldn't stop thinking about her words. It felt like life had just handed me a mirror, and for the first time, I saw the chaos I'd been weaving unconsciously. Every anxious thought, every rushed decision, every time I ignored gratitude, those were my threads. I realized I wasn't weaving my life, I was letting it unravel. So I made a promise to myself to start weaving intentionally. Not by changing my entire life overnight, but by choosing one small thread each day. The next morning, I started with silence, just 5 minutes of sitting still before checking my phone. It felt strange at first, uncomfortable even, but then I noticed the calm. The next week, I added gratitude. One note per day, writing down something that made me smile. A warm coffee, a kind message, a sunset over the train tracks. Tiny threads, but each one mattered. As days turned into weeks, I began to see something I hadn't seen before, a subtle pattern. The more I practiced, the stronger it became. My mornings didn't change the world, but they changed me. Of course, not every day was perfect. Some threads were messy. There were moments of anger, loneliness, self-doubt. I remember one afternoon when a client rejected my design after weeks of work. I felt the frustration rising like a storm. Old me would have drowned in it. But that day I paused. I took a walk, breathed, came back, and I told myself it's just a frayed edge. Because Margaret was right, every tapestry has them. Instead of ripping the whole thing apart, I learned to mend, to turn my mistakes into texture, my setbacks into strength. It wasn't about perfection anymore. It was about presence. Over time, I noticed something beautiful. When you start weaving your own happiness, thread by thread, others begin to notice. A colleague once said, "You seem lighter these days." I smiled, thinking of Margaret's words, and I realized my threads were beginning to touch others. Joy, I discovered, multiplies when shared. So I started teaching a small workshop on creative mindfulness, not because I was an expert, but because I had finally understood something simple, yet profound. Happiness isn't a product of control, it's a product of connection. Every person we meet, every challenge we face, every moment we live adds color to our tapestry. The trick is to stop chasing the perfect pattern and start trusting the process. Now, years later, whenever life feels uncertain, I picture that loom again. I imagine my hands holding threads, some vibrant, some dark, and I whisper to myself, keep weaving. Because the masterpiece of our life isn't built in a day. It's crafted through 1,000 tiny choices, acts of kindness, moments of gratitude, and courage to begin again. And maybe that's what true joy really is. Not a destination, but a lifelong weaving of everything we are. So if today feels messy, If you've dropped a few threads, don't give up. Pick them up again, because even the tangled parts can still become something beautiful. If this story touched something inside you, take a moment tonight to look at your own tapestry. What colors have you been weaving lately? Are they bright with gratitude or dark with neglect? Share your thoughts in the comments. And tell me one thread you want to start weaving more intentionally this week. And if this story spoke to your heart, subscribe to Story Lantern, so together we can keep weaving stories that light the way forward.